What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you my next 10 reviews as I return from a holiday break with Christmas just being a few days ago. And as we start looking towards the new year, I figured I'd catch everybody up to speed on what I have planned for the first few months of 2024. Though with that in mind, the time frame for these reviews is probably going to be like roughly mid-March at most, which means games like Dragon's Dogma 2 that are coming out in late March aren't kind of on the list by default. I am definitely planning to get to that one. I'm also including a list of maybes that I'm not really sure whether or not I'll do full reviews for yet, and there's also a few games that technically slated for Q1 2024 don't actually have a release date yet, so it's hard to say when we'll see those. Probably also a good time to mention that this is a PC channel, so things that are exclusive to PlayStation don't make the list, such as Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, though sometime this year I might get around to the original remake for it. With that said though, I have two maybes that I would like to start this video with. These have release dates, but I just haven't decided whether or not to review them just yet, which are Last Epoch and Grand Blue Fantasy Relink. Last Epoch is an ARPG that has been in early access since 2019, but is getting an official release on February 21st. It looks pretty interesting. I haven't had a chance to mess around with it too much though, and there are several other games releasing right around that time, so I just don't know if I'll get to it. If I do, it's unlikely that it will be a review after 100% like I normally do. It'll probably be more in line with what I did for Diablo, which was just sort of a comprehensive general review of the title, as it is likely to change over time. And games like that don't really fit my general approach to things. But the other one, Grand Blue Fantasy Relink, seems to be a co-op action adventure, that is to say a sort of hack and slash you can play with friends, and the hang-up here is I don't fully understand what this game is gameplay-wise yet. I have to do some more research into it, as at first glance it doesn't really seem like something I would be into, but people have been asking me about it, so at the very least I might do like a checkout video and then, having played it for myself, decide where to go from there. And that brings us to the proper list here. Now, the first review you guys are going to see out of me is for 7, The Days Long Gone. You're probably going to see this weekend, as it is a pretty short title. But 7 here is a game that came out quite some time ago, a few years back, and was generally considered, I would say, a janky hidden gem. It's a little hard to define. In some ways, I'd almost consider it an immersive sim, other ways an action RPG, other ways a stealth isometric game, so it's got a few different things going on. And I'd actually meant to take a look at it forever ago, but it's a game that has had a few serious bugs, and one in particular caused the game to crash for a lot of people roughly a minute after startup, and they finally patched that bug out this year, so I'm finally able to take a full look at it. Excited to play through the rest of it. It's very short though. I'm kind of already in the middle of this one, so this one won't take long at all. But immediately after 7 The Days Long Gone is done, I won't be doing another review immediately, so much as I will be finishing Honor Mode for Baldur's Gate 3. As people who watch the channel know, I covered that game extensively, and the review after 100% for that took me about 500 hours, I think 495 to be specific. A couple weeks after I got that done, they finally dropped Honor Mode, which I was excited for. It's something I wanted, but at the time they dropped it, I just didn't have the energy to do it right then, as I had just played BG3 for 500 hours on top of many other games, and now that I've finally got my schedule sort of caught up, it's time to finally tackle Honor Mode after I finish 7, and that'll be coming in the first couple weeks of January sometime. But then after that, we are going to pivot a little bit to my first release review for 2024, which will be Sovereign Syndicate, a narrative game sort of in the style of Disco Elysium, set in a Victorian steampunk London. That, of course, blends elements of fantasy into it at the same time. And having played the game across a few different demos and the like, it certainly has some promise. Really, the big thing here is how the story pans out overall, as games like this tend to live and die by the interesting narrative and options available to you. But seeing as we're unlikely to get a follow-up to Disco Elysium given that studio's implosion, it's nice to see something in that vein coming out, and I'm looking forward to checking this one out. Now, after that, things get much more hazy in terms of the dates. A few things still have release dates, and we'll talk about those first, but beyond that, where everything else just kind of is an ambiguous Q1 release date, it's really hard to say exactly. So from here, they're in no particular order. But first up, we have Banishers, Ghosts of New Eden, which is a third-person action adventure from Don't Nod, a studio whose games I have enjoyed quite a bit. And in this one, you take on the role of two ghost hunters, one of which just so happens to die, which puts them in a bit of a precarious situation overall. And the visuals combined with the haunting atmosphere have me very curious about this one. It launches on February 13th, which brings me to the Thaumaturge. From the same people, actually, that made 7, the Thaumaturge takes place in Warsaw in 1905 and follows the story of our Thaumaturge, of course, who goes around solving problems with strange beings known as salutors, who cause all sorts of problems by attaching themselves to the emotional personalities of sorts, you could say, of certain people, and you'll unravel mysteries while also dealing with these demons or salutors. But the catch is you can actually sort of catch and bind them to you and force them to do your bidding, which makes it a sort of eldritch Pokemon affair. But both the story and the art, on top of some interesting game mechanics, have me excited to check this one out. It was initially supposed to release last year, but got pushed, of course, to February 20th. In a very similar situation, we then have Broken Roads, an upcoming narrative CRPG set in a post-apocalyptic Australia that was also supposed to come out late last year, but was pushed. This one does not have a release date. It is just Q1 2024 sometime. This game, though, features a pretty unique, I would say, moral compass system that sort of defines your worldview and then, of course, affects the options available to you. So I'm looking forward to seeing how much the choice and consequence plays into this one. And while I don't expect it to be like a big combat mechanics heavy style game, it does still have some of that, and it'll be interesting to see how a lot of this pulls together. Now, curiously enough, and I don't know if this will affect the launch date of this game at all, its publisher was originally Versus Evil, which was just very recently, like this past week, shut down. And I don't know what that means for Broken Roads, considering how close they are to their release date. So I guess only time will tell from there. Now, moving on a little bit, everything else doesn't have a release date, which is a couple more games, and then we'll get into some older stuff. Starting with Geneforge 2 Infestation. This is a remake of Geneforge 2, I would say almost cult classic line of CRPGs from Spiderweb Software behind the Geneforge and Avernum series. Geneforge overall, though, has a really cool premise of you being a shaper, a wizard who can shape life, which brings all sorts of ethical dilemmas. But these series of games, Geneforge, Avernum, and a couple others from Spiderweb Software, are some of the major older CRPGs I have yet to get around to, so having one be remade is a great opportunity to do that and check it out after having already covered the first one. So excited to jump into the second one. Again, no release date, just Q1 2024 sometime, which is the same situation for Stalker 2, albeit a very different genre of game, first-person shooter, but with heavy RPG mechanics. The Stalker series is pretty, I would say, infamous for its interesting game mechanics, though Stalker 2 here aims to sort of modernize a lot of that, and while I admittedly have not played much of the Stalker series overall, I think realistically, given the, I would say, cult classic nature of the other Stalker games, the last of which was released in 2009, I believe, I'd bet a lot of people are probably going to jump into this for the first time, which is likely the angle I will take myself for the review. Now, from there, we have 3 more titles to talk about, but these are prior releases. These are older games that I would simply like to review for the channel in some context, 2 of which I've never played, and 1 will be a trip down memory lane for me. Starting with that one, the trip down memory lane is going to be Oblivion. I love Oblivion. It was my first The Elder Scrolls game, and while obviously I enjoy the title, I haven't done a full playthrough of this game in, I would say, almost 15 years. It was when I was in high school, and while I've played it on and off since then, I have not fully ran through the game in a very long time. Oblivion and Morrowind in particular, I think would fit in really well with just what I normally do. And I'd like to have some video on those for the people who want to see my opinions on those in full, which is a very convenient excuse to say that I want to play Oblivion, so I'm fitting it into the schedule. Now, next up from there, we have Dishonored 2. I played the first Dishonored for the first time just last year, actually, before the new releases got crazy towards the back half of the year, and I, of course, fully intend to check out the second title and its standalone expansion, I believe, called Death of the Outsider. I liked the first game quite a bit, but it was definitely rough around the edges in places and had a lot of room for expansion, which is what I'm hoping, of course, that Dishonored 2 manages to do. And while this is one of those games that I don't really think my opinion will be adding much to the conversation, given both the age of the game and how well received it already was, I doubt I'll tell you anything you don't already know if you've played it before, but I'm still excited to jump into it for myself, which is, I would say, a very similar situation to my next one, which is Nioh 2. I played through Nioh last year, which I thought was great, had a really robust combat system, and almost everyone I've talked to or heard from on that matter says that Nioh 2's combat system manages to take that further with a bunch of refinements and changes that make it even more interesting. And while these games are often billed as Souls-likes, I do think Nioh 1 in particular, so I imagine Nioh 2 as well, manages to really mark a distinct style that isn't really, I would say, traditional Souls-like. I can see where you would call it that because the basics are kind of there, but it manages to be its own thing. So I'm very curious to see what refinements Nioh 2 brought to the table that has everyone so enamored with the second game. But in any event, another game I've been meaning to get around to forever. That said, that's pretty much going to do it for this video. That's all the games I have planned through, I would say again, about mid-March, including new, old, some maybes even. So I hope that keeps you informed on what the channel will be up to. That said, as always, game releases and news is a almost constant stream, so any of this is subject to change, especially the stuff that doesn't have release dates or could even potentially be pushed back, etc. So it is admittedly a little up in the air. But all in all, I think it should be a fun few months for the first part of 2024. But do let me know what you think about all these titles down in the comments section below, and hopefully you're at least looking forward to a few of these. That's going to do it for this video. I certainly hope you enjoyed it. If you did, like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz, but regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.